Very nice. Okay, Damon won.
Let's start.
All right.
Let's start. Okay. Okay, can I just dedicate this to my late grand Avasholom Yetta Bat Yochanan? It's actually a yahrzeit tomorrow, but it doesn't matter. We're still doing it in a dedication for her. There was a lady for the last 20 years of her life was in a wheelchair. She had a stroke and never complained and was just an amazing person. So not everyone's like that. And anyway, so...
Kevin, I'm confused. You told us about your grandmother that passed away a few weeks ago, the one that never complained. And but that was a few weeks ago when we were doing learning. Did you have two grandmothers that didn't complain? Because it's unusual that.
Who was that one? That was I think that was that wasn't
No, do you remember? You were talking about
I think maybe that was her birthday. That was for her birthday, I think.
Okay.
This is the yahrzeit.
It had to have been the same woman because it's
I remember that as well.
To have two grandmothers that don't complain on both sides of the family. It's statistically unlikely. So, okay, we're talking about the same wonderful person you were telling us before. Wonderful.
Okay, so let's just do it briefly here. Okay, so, and for all the Cholim of Klal Yisrael, refer Shlema. Okay, traveling on a caravan. And they're talking about not a caravan that you're attached to a tow bar. There's a caravan for a journey through the desert, which is basically I think they were camels. Okay, so it says, well, I think it means a vessel like a boat, but a caravan, 3,000 years ago, they weren't boats. They weren't, I don't even think they were horse and cart. They may have been chariots, but I don't think they were for commercial or for like people like for widespread customers, for customers who wanted to go from A to B. Anyway, so it says if they set out on Wednesday or before Thursday, according to the Vilna Gaon, and traveling through the desert, one does not commit to participate in or assist with any malachas, even though they are only rabbinically prohibited. For the purposes of so Wednesday or Thursday Wednesday is okay, ideally. Okay, I mean, unforeseen circumstances, I'm sure you could, but anyway, traveling caravan for mitzvah purposes is permitted, even if the caravan sets out on Friday, providing that other travelers agree to travel on Friday with him or her. For land travel, unlike boat travel, the stipulation is a prerequisite. If they do not agree in the first instance, one may not travel with them. Okay, then continuing here. If they refuse to stop for Shabbat once they are in the desert and remaining alone is dangerous, one may travel with the caravan even beyond the Tuchum, which is the boundary, even more than 12 mil, until he or she reaches a safe spot, at which point he must take leave of the caravan. So if they're traveling through a dangerous area and have Shabbat happens to come in, you're allowed to carry on until you reach a point of safety. And okay, that's the thing about the caravan, which is basically traveling using transport, plane or boat. But one should ideally leave on Wednesday, because if it's Thursday, and if there's a delay, like a flight, you may arrive just before Shabbos, or actually on Shabbos, which has happened in the past. So Wednesday is a good day. One shouldn't travel later than Wednesday.
Guys, so let's just do the shiur. Do you want a bit of a repeat of explaining the concepts of yesterday? Otherwise, give it over.
Yeah, please.
You guys can.
Yesterday we were all exhausted. Me specifically.
And me,
right.
yeah.
All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through the content very quickly and explain to you. The first thing I want to actually do, I think, is to share my screen, because that's going to give you a little bit of clarity. Otherwise, you guys are going to be completely lost. Arthur, don't look, because you're going to get derailed in every way. You're on your back. Right, I'm just waiting for Gavin, then we'll get started.
No, I'm listening. You can continue.
All right,
speaker. I can hear everything.
All right, so guys, sometimes there's a theme that's repeated in the Gemara. We learned in the previous daf okay, in the 71st daf about the slaughter. Does a slaughter occur in the beginning of the process or the end of a process?
End.
Okay. Now, we were looking at far as what would happen if a person used that for idolatry, because there were two themes going on. This is important to remember. The one is the theme of the thief that stole the ox and then slaughtered it, and therefore he is eligible for what, guys, for stealing an ox?
Fivefold payment.
Correct. Fourfold for a sheep. That's correct. Fivefold for an ox. Absolutely correct, Kevin. And then that sort of shchita about him slaughtering the stolen animal, when is he eligible for that fivefold payment?
At the end of it, once the actual animal, not while the shochet starts, actually the actual cutting, while at the end, once the animal is dead, I think.
Correct. So the majority of the opinions, Gavin and Arthur, is that exactly as Kevin said, with regard to the eligibility for the fivefold payment, it's generally at the end of the process by the majority of opinions, okay? Because the term is in the pasuk, he shall slaughter it. Now, what we learned when we used the word it before is it in its entirety. So in other words, it's at the end of the process when it's the complete severing of the trachea and the esophagus, okay? Well, at least past the halfway mark, that's for sure. So then that makes sense, but then you've got a bit of a difficulty, because there's a concurring theme that happens at the same time that we learned in the 71st daf. And what was that? If the thief himself committed idol worship while slaughtering the animal, there is the death penalty for the thief, so automatically there would not be a fourfold or fivefold payment. Do you see that, Gav?
Yeah.
Obviously. So that's not a chiddush, because kimle b'di rabba minay. We give the greater penalty, not the lesser penalty. However, we're saying this is a case that we learned in the 71st daf about what? The thief has an agent that slaughters the animal with a proper shchita on his behalf. And we're saying, how could it be? Because generally there's a concept there can be no agency through transgression, which means somebody doing a hit for the mafia boss gets the death penalty, but not the mafia boss, because he never carried out the hit. And he knows the law. He's not allowed to. Hashem said no. The law of the land says no. So in that particular case, he's eligible for the death penalty, the hitman, not the mafia boss. In the next world, the mafia boss is fully responsible, but it's indirect. It's called grama. So we're saying here, just like if somebody stole and then sold a stolen animal, he has to have a buyer in order that he sells the animal. So there are two parties involved. And then it follows the same symmetry here, where for an idol worship, if the thief might not know how to slaughter the animal, so he pays somebody who's a proper shochet, and he has an agent involved. And just like a seller thief is involved for the fivefold payment if somebody else buys it, so to here we see that if a thief has a slaughterer for him, he's also like an agent, like a buyer, in the sense that there's a partnership. And that's why he pays a fivefold or fourfold payment. Generally, there's no responsibility for the person that hires the agent, but this is an exceptional case. So we say the slaughterer gets put to death for idol worship, but the thief himself that got the slaughterer to do it is eligible for the fivefold payment if he steals an ox. Okay. Now the question arises, what happens then? Because if for idol worship, the animal is now prohibited for benefit, the thief can't use it, the original owner can't use it, and no Jew can use it. So then technically he doesn't owe the original owner, even Kimle b'di Rabba Minei Asat, because he's got an agent here. He doesn't owe it. Why? Because at the same time as the slaughtering took place, making him eligible for the fivefold payment for stealing an ox, it also made the activity of idol worship eligible for a service to that idol. And therefore you can't make use of the animal, so it cancels out the 4 or 5-fold payment. Does everybody understand that concept?
Yeah.
Good.
Say what's cancel out the 4. Why does it do that again?
Because anything like idol worship or having a non-consecrated animal in the temple courtyard means you can't benefit from the animal. The original owner can't and the thief can't. So since there's no benefit, there's no 5-fold payment. It cancels it out. Because it's there's an eligibility for the 4 or 5-fold payment only when the original only when the thief can basically use it for consumption and human benefit. We learned that before, that if it's for therapeutic reasons or for dogs, we wouldn't think there's an eligibility according to Rav Shimon for a 4 or 5-fold payment. But we learned that there was, because it doesn't mean that it wasn't a proper shchita where the person, apart from therapeutic benefit or giving it to the dogs, can't partake of the animal itself. So we learned from there, if you can't get benefit from the animal, there's no 5-fold payment. And since no one can get benefit, the original owner of the thief, from an animal that's rendered off grounds to consume, then there's no 5-fold payment, because it's being created by the same act. Just like the agent, there's kimle b'di rabba minay. If there was no agent and there was a thief that committed the idol worship by slaughtering the animal, then there's no 5-fold payment, because for the same act, where he's eligible for the 5-fold payment, he gets the death penalty, so we waiver the financial lower penalty. Here with an agent, the agent gets the death penalty for being the thief's partner, but the thief has to pay the 5-fold payment if the animal is rendered allowed for benefit. But if it's not from idol worship, he cannot use it, neither can the original owner, so then there's no 5-fold or 4-fold payment. So that's what we're learning. But we're learning it's not so simple, because our Mishnah says, well, there is eligibility, so how can that be? It can be simply because they happen at 2 different time periods. In other words, the calculated time at which slaughter, shchita, occurs for the eligibility, Kevin, of the 4-fold or 5-fold payment is at the end of the shchita process. In other words, you shall slaughter it in its entirety. The term "it" meaning you shall have completed the process, not the initial incision or surgical incision. Complete it, or at least past the point of no return. So at that point, Kev, you falling asleep? Huh? At that point, the slaughter, at the end point, the slaughter eligibility for the 4 or 5-fold payment kicks in, because if a thief steals and slaughters an animal, that's when the payment kicks in. However, if we want to say that for idol worship, for example, when the thief's agent does it, or in our Mishnah's case, if it's a treifa, or let's take our case, it's a non-consecrated animal sacrificed in the temple courtyard, it means you can't use it. So if they say that is only at the end of once the animal is sacrificed, then it's no problem, because the 5-fold or 4-fold payment kicks in before that non-eligibility of using that animal for benefit. Do you get what I'm saying? In other words, if they're both at the end, Kevin, there is the 5-fold payment due, because the obligation of a thief to pay for an animal that he stole and slaughtered is at the end of the process, and therefore, if the idol worshipping is also considered a consummation of the slaughtering as part of the idol worshipping ritual, then they're both at the end, which means the 5-fold penalty can kick in. If it's if it's the idol worshipping where the thief is eligible and his agent gets the death penalty. If it's, in our case, a non-consecrated animal in a temple courtyard, and it's judged at the same time period where it's both at the end of slaughter, then the fivefold payment for the penalty for the thief kicks in before the animal is rendered not fit for benefit from the original owner. However, if you say the case of idol worship or the case of slaughtering an animal that's not consecrated in the temple courtyard is at the beginning of the process, but the obligation to pay the fivefold payment from the thief who slaughtered the stolen animal is at the end of the process, then there's no fivefold payment because you can't benefit from it from the first surgical cut. Do you see what I'm saying, guys? Or are you still lost?
No, I'm fine. Kevin, you're right.
You can't benefit from the first surgical cut because that's not the. You don't mean if there's idol worship, because if it's used for idolatry, you can't use it at all.
Okay.
There's no.
I'm going to share my notes and we're going to read them together, and then it's going to make sense. All right. So if shchita, we're not talking about kosher shchita here. We're talking about eligibility of the fourfold or fivefold payment. Is it at the end of the process or is it at the start of the cutting of the trachea and esophagus? There are two opinions. Surprise, surprise. As far as idol worship is concerned, some rabbis say it's at the beginning and other rabbis say it's at the end of the process. In other words, when that ritual forbidden practice occurs. So regarding the four or fivefold payment for theft and slaughter, it's at the end of the slaughter. There's no dispute about that generally. So the rabbis say that slaughter for idol worship, even if it's a little cut to start the process, if those rabbis that hold by that opinion, that the first cut starts the idol worship process, you don't have to wait for the animal to be finished being slaughtered. If his intentions were idol worship in terms of a ritual, and from the first surgical cut to start the process, the animal then becomes forbidden for benefit, and thus the thief's agent starts to cut it as part of idol worship, and the agent obviously gets the death penalty, but the thief, in this case, does not need to pay the four or fivefold payment to the original owner, as neither party can benefit or use it. So only a double payment is made, because we know for a normal theft, if he steals, he shall pay double. So Kevin, according to the opinions that say that an idol worshipping slaughter practice occurs at the beginning, there's no four or fivefold payment, because the animal's rendered unfit for benefit before the end of the slaughter, making the thief eligible for the four or fivefold payment. There are other rabbinic opinions who say slaughter for idol worship occurs only at the end of the process. So then the four or fivefold penalty is applied just before you can no longer use the animal. So the thief's agent gets a death penalty and the thief has to pay the fourfold or fivefold. Am I making sense, guys?
Yeah, it's clear to me.
Kev?
Kevin?
Yeah, I saw the text. My mind's not 100% with today, but I'm focusing. But I can't give it over. But that the agent, you said the agent gets the death penalty because he was the one that approved of the idol worship for the animal to go for idolatry.
He slaughtered the agent slaughtered the
animal. The agent slaughtered the animal for idol worship.
So he gets the death penalty. And we wonder why the thief is even eligible for the four or fivefold payment, because we learn that there can be no agency through transgression. This is an exceptional case, because it uses the pasuk that if you sell the animal, which means you need a buyer, a partner to help you, same as if you slaughter it and you need somebody to help you shecht it, in that case, the thief bears financial responsibility for his partner. Because how do you sell an animal if you've got no buyer? How do you slaughter if you have no idea how to slaughter it and you're just good at stealing? So in that fact, there can be, in this case, a responsibility through agency in terms of financial payment, but death penalty will only be for the person that actually slaughters for idol worship. But so what we're saying is the penalty for the thief kicks in at the end of the shchita process. If the rabbis say as far as the idol worship, the ritual slaughter is concerned, that occurs at the end of the slaughter process as well, then that fivefold or fourfold penalty kicks in before the non-benefit of the animal occurs from idol worship, so the thief has to pay it to the original owner. If you want to hold by the rabbis who say that shchita for idol worship is at the beginning of the first surgical cut of the trachea and esophagus, then immediately you can't use the animal for benefit, so there will be no four or fivefold payment because that would occur at the end of the process. So the animal is null and void even before we stopped. It's as simple as that. And this is the same principle that goes with the temple courtyard. So, sacrificing an animal that's non-consecrated in the temple courtyard. There's no death penalty, Kevin. But if the thief does that, then we're saying that you've got a problem. If you want to say that sort of ritual slaughter is also at the end, then we understand why the Mishnah says there's a 4 or 5-fold payment. If we say that they're not rendering it for benefit is at the first surgical cut, then at that point, you can't use the animal, so there's no 4 or 5-fold payment for the thief for the slaughter option, because the animal's already not fit for benefit for him or the original owner. If you want to say that the transgression about slaughtering a non-consecrated animal in the temple courtyard occurs only at the end of the shchita process, well, then that's fine, because the 4 or 5-fold payment kicks in at the end also, which means you pay that before the non-eligibility of the animal is concerned where you don't derive benefit. So there was a question that was asked in the Gemara, and that was, well, what do you say to the opinion that the shchita then is considered, there is a rabbinic opinion, at the beginning of the process for the eligibility for the 4 or 5-fold penalty. So we're saying that's fine, but it would only work that there would be incumbent upon the thief the penalty to pay if we considered the penalty of slaughtering a non-consecrated animal in the temple courtyard basically at the end of the shchita process. So in other words, the 4 or 5-fold kicks in first. So all we're saying is, Kevin, in a nutshell, it's an issue of timing. That's all it is. All right, so I'm going to read. I've got 6 minutes to quickly read the Gemara very quickly. 8 minutes. Just give me 8 minutes, guys, and then we good. Okay. So the Gemara starts the clause of the Mishnah that reads, if he slaughters it and it's found to be a treifa, etc. So we know those rules. You can't have it. But this is the interesting part. If he slaughters it as a non-consecrated animal in the temple courtyard, he pays the 4-fold or 5-fold payment. So the Gemara infers a principle from the Mishnah's ruling that one who steals an ox or sheep and then slaughters it as a non-consecrated animal in the temple courtyard pays the 4 or 5-fold payment. Rav Chavivi, the Mechazan, said to Rav Ashi, learn from this that shchita is only at the end of the slaughtering procedure. Because Rav Chavivi suggests that our Mishnah's ruling that one who steals an ox or sheep and then slaughters it as a non-consecrated animal in the temple courtyard is liable to the 4-fold payment. And that demonstrates that shchita is said to occur only at the end of the slaughtering procedure. In other words, at the moment the trachea and esophagus are severed beyond the halfway mark. Because according to that opinion, the animal that the thief slaughtered indeed belonged to the original owner throughout the entire act of slaughter, as it is only at the very conclusion of the slaughtering process that an act of transgression occurred about slaughtering a non-consecrated animal in the temple courtyard, which renders the animal prohibited for benefit took place. But that's only after the 5-fold penalty kicked in for slaughtering or stealing the animal. Okay? So for if the shchita is from the beginning to the end of the slaughtering procedure, then why does the thief pay the 4- or 5-fold payment when he slaughters a stolen, non-consecrated animal in the temple courtyard? While once the thief cuts a little, he's rendered it forbidden for benefit. Accordingly, when he cuts the rest of the amount required to complete his act of slaughter and make him liable to the 4-fold or 5-fold payment, it's not his animal that he's slaughtering. So the Gemara rejects the inference. Rav Huna, the son of Rava, said to him, when he is liable in our Mishnah to the 4-fold or 5-fold payment for slaughtering the stolen animal as a non-consecrated animal in the temple courtyard, it's for that little portion of slaughter that he's liable. Okay? Because Rav Huna, the son of Rava, argues that the thief's liability to the 4-fold or 5-fold payment for slaughtering is in fact incurred as soon as he makes the initial decision. And at that point, the animal still belongs to the original owner. Okay? So the Gemara reestablishes the inference. Rav Ashi said to him, do not reject Rav Chavivi's proof in this manner. For in order to be liable for slaughter, we need to fulfill the verse, and he slaughters it, which implies the entirety of it. So he must complete the act of slaughter at the end process, and this is lacking when he slaughters it only a little. Okay, the Gemara asks, but then there's a difficulty. If shchita is from the beginning to the end, then the non-consecrated animal slaughtered in the temple courtyard became prohibited for all benefit with the initial incision. How then can the thief be liable to the 4-fold or 5-fold payment when he completes the slaughter? Rav Ashi said to him, thus Rav Gamda said in the name of Rava, the Mishnah's ruling that the thief is liable to the 4-fold or 5-fold payment for slaughtering an animal as a non-consecrated animal in the temple courtyard pertains in a case where he slaughtered part of the pipes outside the temple courtyard, and he completed slaughtering them inside the courtyard. So the animal was situated outside the temple courtyard when the shchita began, and it entered the temple courtyard only at the moment that he completed the severing of the majority of the 2 pipes. So if you want to say it's at the beginning, and that's when the prohibition of the temple courtyard occurs, we're saying that he never took the animal in at the beginning. He started the shchita process outside the temple courtyard, and he only dragged it in towards the end, and that renders it unfit for use, but not before the 4- or 5-fold penalty kicked in. So the Gemara presents a different version of the previous Gemara. We've got 4 minutes left, guys. Let me just finish this quickly. And what does it say? There are those who teach the preceding discussion as having taken place with reference to the following dispute. Rav Shimon ben Lakish said in the name of Rav Levi the older, shchita is only at the end of the slaughtering procedure, but Rav Yochanan says shchita is from the beginning to the end. Rav Chavivi the Machozan said to Rav Ashi, shall we say that Rav Yochanan holds the prohibition against benefiting from non-consecrated animals that were slaughtered in the temple courtyard is perhaps not rabbinical? For it should enter your mind to say that if it is biblical, according to Rav Yochanan, you will be confronted with the following difficulty. Why does our Mishnah hold the thief liable to the 4- or 5-fold payment for slaughtering a stolen animal as a non-consecrated animal in the temple courtyard, while Rav Yochanan views shchita from beginning to end? As soon as the thief slaughters it a little, he is rendered it forbidden for benefit. Hence, when he slaughters the rest, it's not the animal of the original owner is slaughtering. The Gemara replies, Rav Acha, the son of Rava, said to me, you have no proof from here that Rav Yochanan may indeed maintain that the prohibition against benefiting from the non-consecrated animal slaughtered in the temple courtyard is biblical. So we say we don't know if it could be rabbinic. It's just as likely that it could be rabbinical. And when too is he liable in our Mishnah to the 4-fold or 5-fold payment for slaughtering the stolen animal as a non-consecrated animal? It's for when he slaughters that little portion of the initial cut of the animal that is liable. The Gemara rejects the answer. Rav Ashi said to him, do not reject Rav Chavivi's proof. We need to fulfill the verse, and he slaughters it in its entirety. The Gemara says that difficulty remains. If it's only rabbinic, then what do? Rav Ashi said to him, no, we can deflect Rav Chavivi's proof in a different way. He's saying it's biblical. Rav Kamda said in the name of Rabbi, when is he liable for slaughtering a non-consecrated animal in the temple courtyard? In a case where he slaughtered part of the pups outside the temple courtyard and he completed slaughtering them inside the temple courtyard. So we're saying that has to be the explanation of it's biblical. Because if it's rabbinic, then it's not as strict. If it's biblical, we have to say that if Rav Yochanan is saying that it's from the initial incision, it has to be that the animal started being cut when he was outside the temple courtyard. Otherwise, there would be no 4 or 5-fold payment according to our Mishnah. And then he brought it in at the end to Shecht, but already the 5-fold payment at the end of Shechita and at the end of when it was prohibited kicked in, so the 5-fold payment is eligible. But it would have to be under those circumstances. All right. So, Kevin, the liability is a question of timing. As long as it's at the end of the Shechita process, the slaughtering in the temple courtyard of non-consecrated animal, the 5-fold or 4-fold payment kicks in. If it's for the initial cut, it doesn't kick in. That's all we say.
Yeah. Because initial cut, that won't kill the animal. Eventually it will. Eventually it will,
but the 5-fold payment is at the end of the Shechita process. So, all right, guys. I hope that was clear. We're not going to spend any more time on this. So we wish you a good Shabbos.
And what's a Shabbos? What time? Straight as Shabbos comes out, eh?
Done.
Yeah, if you can.
Done. So we're actually heading towards a good one now.